Hey guys, tonight we step softly into the chamber of emperors long past, where power and prophecy mingled with dreams. Imagine the stillness of the forbidden city at night, when torches flickered against red lacquered walls, and the only sound was the sigh of the wind through carved wooden beams. The emperor, the son of heaven himself, lay beneath embroidered silk covers, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, and it was there, in that half-lit world of shadows, that visions came so strange, so vivid, that they were recorded as if they were decrees of state. Do you dare find out how it was done? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A dream whispered to the emperor was not simply a personal fancy. In ancient China, it could be a matter of empire. The palace scribes, entrusted with preserving every detail of court life, sometimes found themselves recording the very contents of their ruler's sleep. Can you imagine the hush in the hall when an emperor rose at dawn, eyes heavy, and declared, "Last night I saw a figure cloaked in fire, standing at the southern gates." Suddenly, that dream became state business. For common people, dreams were curiosities. For an emperor, they were potential dispatches from heaven itself. Confucian scholars taught that the Son of Heaven held a mandate granted by celestial order. If he dreamed of flood or famine, officials trembled. Was it a warning of cosmic displeasure? Should policy shift? Was sacrifice required? A dream was no longer a dream, it was a signal. And signals demanded action. Picture the scribe, hunched over bamboo slips or fine paper, dipping his brush in ink as he tried to capture the words of the half-awake sovereign. Every stroke mattered. If the emperor muttered about a crimson dragon coiling through the sky, it was written as precisely as a law. The record would be sealed in archives, alongside edicts and treaties. That alone tells us how seriously dreams were taken, placed side by side with the most binding documents of state. What made these visions so unsettling is not only their strangeness, but their uncanny echoes in the waking world. One emperor dreamt of horses running wild through his palace courtyard. Days later, news arrived of nomadic riders breaching the northern border. Coincidence? Perhaps, but to anxious ministers, it was proof of heaven's voice breaking into mortal sleep. And think for a moment of the emperor himself, power beyond measure, yet lying awake in the dark, heart pounding after a nightmare. Was it simply indigestion from too much wine at the evening feast, or had the cosmos truly spoken? The weight of a realm balanced on the fragile images of a restless mind. The court became a place of whispers. Ministers leaned toward one another, brows furrowed. Did you hear what His Majesty dreamed? Superstition and politics merged. Some courtiers might exaggerate the meaning, twisting interpretation for their own advantage. If an emperor dreamed of floods, an ambitious minister might argue for building canals under his supervision. If he dreamed of enemies, generals lobbied for more troops. Dreams could be tools, weapons, and sometimes excuses. At night, the emperor's chamber became both sanctuary and stage. Imagine him turning on his silk pillow, while outside, guards paced with halberds gleaming in the moonlight. Within the hush of incense smoke, visions unfurled, storms, dragons, ancestors appearing in whispers. Sometimes gentle, sometimes terrifying, but always powerful, always recorded. Modern minds might call it coincidence, or the subconscious processing fears of the day. Yet for the men and women who stood in gilded halls, these visions were not mere accidents of sleep. They were bridges between heaven and earth. And if heaven was displeased, the empire trembled. One particular night stands out in the chronicles. The emperor dreamed of a vast courtyard, where pillars bent and cracked as if under invisible weight. The following week, an earthquake struck the capital, toppling towers and shaking the very palace itself. The diary entry for that morning is still whispered about by historians. How could a dream anticipate disaster so closely? Of course, not every dream matched reality. Some passed without event, but the mere possibility that slumber might reveal destiny was enough to chill the blood of ministers who staked their careers on interpreting signs correctly. Would you dare to dismiss the dream of the Son of Heaven, knowing a wrong word might cost your life? The dreams became more than private reflections. They were political instruments, hidden weapons wielded in silk and shadow. They justified reforms, excused failures, or emboldened campaigns. And yet, they also revealed something deeply human. Even emperors, with armies at their command, were haunted by images beyond control. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into your own soft visions, think of the emperor lying centuries ago under the same stars. His dreams were not private refuge but matters of empire. And one such dream, scribbled carefully into the palace diary, was about to shake the confidence of his most loyal generals. The morning light spilled across golden tiles as the emperor's attendants whispered of what had been written the night before. A dream had been carefully inked into the palace diary. Strange figures, drifting clouds, a sound like distant bells. To most listeners, it might seem like a passing curiosity, but in the Forbidden City, such images were interpreted as heaven's cryptic messages, guiding or warning the Son of Heaven himself. For centuries, emperors were told that their power rested on the mandate of heaven. It wasn't simply an abstract idea, it was a living doctrine. If the emperor ruled with virtue, heaven would bless the land with harmony. If he erred, heaven would send signs, storms, earthquakes, or sometimes dreams. Ministers and scholars pored over these signs, weighing their meaning with trembling hearts. Imagine being a court astrologer, summoned at dawn. The emperor describes his dream, a crimson moon rising above a field of withered grain. You kneel, brush in hand, struggling to find words. Was it a warning of famine? A suggestion that the people's hunger might soon threaten the throne? Interpret too harshly, and you risk offending the ruler. Interpret too softly, and you risk ignoring heaven itself. Every phrase could decide your fate. There were rules to follow. The Zhou Li, an ancient ritual classic, outlined methods of dream interpretation alongside ceremonies for sacrifices and omens. Dreams of animals, dreams of natural disasters, dreams of ancestors, they were all categorized. A tiger might mean danger, a phoenix good fortune, and water often stood for floods or renewal. Yet no book could account for every strange image. And that is where anxiety crept in. The emperor himself often faced a paradox. If heaven truly sent these messages, ignoring them might bring calamity. But if every dream was sacred, governance would collapse into superstition. So he chose carefully, sometimes consulting multiple ministers to balance perspectives. Picture the hall, scrolls unfurled, scholars in long robes debating the meaning of a single image seen in sleep. Was it a dragon you saw, majesty, or a serpent? The difference is no small matter. Some emperors leaned heavily into belief. Emperor Ming of Han was said to have dreamed of a golden man whose presence glowed like the sun. Ministers claimed it was a vision of the Buddha, long before Buddhism spread widely in China. Others, more skeptical, treated dreams as reflections of daily burdens. Even skeptics felt compelled to have them recorded, just in case heaven's hand truly moved through the night. There's a fascinating tension here. On one hand, dreams could be tools of governance. They justified new policies, inspired rituals, or reassured the people that the emperor listened to heaven. On the other hand, they revealed the vulnerability of power. For all his armies and wealth, the emperor was still a man, lying restless in bed, at the mercy of shifting images he could not control. It's easy to imagine how courtiers might exploit this. If an emperor dreamt of floods, a cunning minister could argue for building new canals under his direction, of course. If he dreamt of enemies, generals lobbied for war. A single dream could open the treasury, launch a campaign, or silence dissent. Dreams became currency, traded in whispers and maneuvering. But beyond politics, there was a spiritual dimension. The Chinese cosmos was thought to be woven with patterns. Dreams were threads, hinting at the larger tapestry. To disregard them would be like ignoring a loose thread tugging at destiny itself. Still, not all dreams were benign. Some carried an edge of terror. Ministers wrote of emperors waking drenched in sweat, muttering of shadows clawing at palace gates. These accounts did not fade into the air. They were preserved, locked in archives, read centuries later by historians and, tonight, by you. So, as the emperor's dreams were inked into record after record, the palace grew accustomed to treating sleep as a second throne room. The emperor ruled by day, but at night, visions ruled him. And one night, a nightmare arrived with the roar of beasts so vivid, so frightening, that when it was recorded, generals read it as a prophecy of rebellion, waiting just beyond the palace walls. The chamber was still, lit only by the pale glow of lanterns that burned through the long Beijing night. The emperor stirred in his sleep, and when dawn came, his words carried a weight that chilled the air. He had seen a tiger at the palace gates. The image was not a gentle vision but a nightmare so vivid that his attendants swore his pulse raced as he spoke. In the language of omens, a tiger was no ordinary beast. It was danger, rebellion, the tearing claws of chaos, poised to strike at the heart of the empire. For the generals, this was not just a dream. It was a prophecy. Imagine their uneasymen trained to measure enemies in troops and weapons, now forced to reckon with a creature born of sleep. A tiger stalking the palace was read as rebellion lurking just outside the walls, waiting to spring. In that tense hall, silence stretched long after the emperor's words fell. Who would dare dismiss heaven's warning? Dreams of animals had long been treated with caution. The tiger, in particular, carried layers of symbolism. It was courage and authority, yes, but also ferocity beyond control. Ancient manuals whispered that if an emperor dreamed of a tiger approaching, it meant enemies were gathering strength. If the tiger leapt inside the gates, the throne itself was in danger. Ministers debated in hushed voices. Was this a warning of disloyalty within or an enemy beyond the borders? The emperor ordered the dream recorded in the palace diary, each brushstroke pressed into silk-bound scrolls. Once preserved, it became more than a fleeting vision, it became history. And history, once written, demanded a response. Armies were mustered with sharper vigilance. Reports from the provinces were read with suspicion. A minor riot could suddenly be magnified. Perhaps the tiger had already clawed at the gate. Consider the effect on morale. A soldier at the frontier, hearing that the emperor dreamed of a tiger, might see every shadow in the woods as a rebel waiting. A minister, fearful of rivals, might accuse them of plotting, using the dream as proof. And for the people, whispers spread that heaven itself had warned of bloodshed. The dream fed on itself, growing larger than the emperor who first spoke it. And yet, there is another layer. Perhaps the tiger was not rebellion at all, but the emperor's own subconscious. The burdens of rule are heavy, and even the Son of Heaven could feel hunted by doubt. Did the tiger stand for his own fear, the gnawing sense that enemies lurked everywhere, that even trusted allies might betray him? Dreams blurred the line between prophecy and psyche, leaving courtiers to puzzle over images that might reveal more about the man than the empire. There are records of such dreams becoming turning points. An emperor, convinced by the vision of the tiger, reshuffled his court, dismissing men he once trusted. In one case, a general executed for suspected disloyalty had been loyal all along. History bent under the weight of sleep, shaped by claws that existed only in the mind's eye. It is unsettling, isn't it, to know that the fate of millions could turn on what a single man saw in the dark of night. And yet, in the palace, no one dared laugh it off. Heaven's hand was too real, too dangerous to ignore. The scroll that carried this dream survives, tucked away in archives, read centuries later by scholars who still marvel at the power of a single vision. Whether it foretold true rebellion or merely reflected royal fear, the tiger remained at the gate not in fur and fang, but in ink and memory. And as the diary tells us, the visions did not stop there, for the emperor would soon dream not of beasts, but of dragons rising from the sea, their coils reflecting the restless waves of invasion. The dream began with the sound of waves. The emperor described lying on a shore that stretched farther than the eye could see, a horizon trembling with light. From the foam rose a dragon, scales shimmering like molten jade, eyes burning with secrets. It coiled and uncoiled above the waters of the eastern sea, its roar echoing like distant thunder. When he awoke, his robes were damp with sweat, and the palace scribes hurried to capture every word. Dragons in Chinese tradition were not the fire-breathing monsters of Western tales. They were creatures of power, reign, and fortune, linked to emperors themselves. Yet a dragon rising from the sea could also signify danger from beyond, the pull of tides that did not answer to the throne. Ministers whispered, was this a warning of invasion from across the waters? The Eastern Sea, after all, was the direction of islands, pirates, and foreign dynasties that sometimes tested China's might. Imagine the forbidden city on that morning, courtiers gathered in anxious silence. The emperor's words carried like sparks through the hall. If heaven showed him dragons and storm-tossed waves, then surely something was stirring beyond the coastline. Was it Japanese raiders, rumors of Mongol fleets, or perhaps, as some scholars dared to suggest, a reflection of the emperor's own unease about controlling the empire's borders? The dream of the dragon was recorded with solemnity. It was not simply noted as a personal vision but entered as if it were a decree. Once inscribed, it carried weight that could ripple across the empire. Coastal defenses were strengthened, envoys were sent with stricter orders, generals prepared fleets. All of this because one man dreamed of a dragon coiling above the sea. Yet the interpretation was never simple. Some argued the dragon was a blessing, that heaven had shown its guardian creature, promising renewal through the tides. Others saw it as a threat, a reminder that waters were never fully tamed. In their debates, politics slipped quietly between the lines. Those who sought resources for coastal defense leaned on the darker reading. Those who wanted peace with neighbors spoke of the dragon as a protector. The dream itself became a stage where rival policies played out. And what of the emperor? He walked through his days with the image still clinging to him, that mighty dragon glaring from behind his thoughts. At ceremonies, when he looked toward the east, he paused a heartbeat too long. It was as if he half expected the sea winds to blow through the walls of the forbidden city itself. There is a quiet irony in this. The emperor, supreme over men, was in some sense powerless before images conjured by sleep. He commanded armies and fleets, yet could not command his own dreams. And in that vulnerability he became most human. Even the Son of Heaven could be shaken by a vision he could not explain. Stories tell us that shortly after this dream, word arrived of unrest along the eastern coast. Pirate raids had unsettled villages, and rumors swirled of foreign ships sighted beyond the horizon. Courtiers gasped at the timing. To them, the dream was vindicated. To dismiss it now would be folly. Heaven had spoken through images of dragon and sea, and reality had bowed in confirmation. But historians reading the record centuries later ask another question. Did the dream foretell the raids, or did the raids simply bend themselves into the shape of the dream? Once the vision was proclaimed, every event was interpreted through its scales and waves. Perhaps the emperor had seen the future, or perhaps the court, primed by fear, found the future inside his dream. Either way, the dragon lingered, a reminder that dreams could ripple through the empire as surely as any edict. And in time, another dream would come, darker still, not of seas or dragons, but of death itself, whispered in the chambers of the palace at midnight. The emperor did not speak quickly that morning. He sat still, his hands clasped together, and when he finally opened his mouth, his words fell like stones into a pond. I saw my own funeral. The scribes, accustomed to recording strange images, faltered. To write that the Son of Heaven had dreamed his death was no small matter. Yet the ink flowed, each brushstroke trembling with the weight of finality. In the dream, the emperor had walked through the great meridian gate, not as a ruler, but as a ghost. Courtiers lined the path, their heads bowed in mourning. Drums beat low, the kind played only at funerals of the highest rank. He described seeing his own coffin, draped in yellow silk, carried upon the shoulders of servants who dared not look up. The vision was so clear that he named familiar faces among the mourners, as though time itself had unraveled to show him his end. For those around him, the meaning was terrifying. To dream of one's death, especially for an emperor, was considered a direct message from heaven. It was not simply a personal omen, it was a tremor through the mandate itself. Ministers exchanged glances heavy with fear. Should they prepare rituals to appease the spirits? Should decrees be altered to avert disaster? The emperor's life was the axis of the realm. If he was destined to die, the empire itself might collapse into chaos. Imagine being a soldier in the capital that day, hearing whispers that the emperor had foreseen his own funeral. The mood would sour like spoiled grain. Markets hushed, temples filled with offerings, mothers pressed incense into their children's hands. The empire breathed uneasily, as though awaiting the toll of a bell that had not yet rung. And what of the emperor himself? Power could silence dissent, but not mortality. That night, he lay awake, staring at the carved beams above his bed, hearing again the drumbeat of his dream. Did he believe the end was truly near? Or did he wonder if it was a warning that he must change course or risk losing heaven's favor? The line between prophecy and possibility blurred, leaving him restless in a palace that suddenly felt like a tomb. Some emperors, faced with such visions, ordered grand ceremonies of renewal, sacrifices to heaven, elaborate rites at the temple of heaven. Decrees of mercy for prisoner Saul meant to show that the emperor was still favored. Others withdrew into suspicion, lashing out at officials, fearing plots that might hasten the dream's fulfillment. History tells of rulers who aged years in a single season after such dreams, their hair whitening as though the vision had stolen color from their lives. It is a haunting thought. The most powerful man in the world, surrounded by guards, walls, and riches, undone by shadows behind his eyelids. No assassin's blade, No rival's scheme, just his own mind whispering of endings. For courtiers, the question was just as dire. If the emperor died soon, who would inherit? Would factions clash? The dream was not only about death, but about the uncertainty it cast over succession. Even today, reading the records, you can feel the tremor in those lines. The dream of his funeral was more than personal dread. It was the kind of vision that could unbalance an empire. And whether or not the emperor truly believed it, his ministers acted as though heaven had spoken. One story says that on the very night after this dream, a violent storm lashed the capital. Thunder cracked so loudly that windows rattled in their frames. To the people, it was confirmation. Heaven itself was mourning in advance. Whether that storm was coincidence or not, it bound the dream even tighter into the fabric of fear. And so the emperor's nights grew heavier, his sleep troubled, his waking hours shadowed by doubt. Yet not every dream was about loss. Some were stranger still, dreams that urged him to act, to change laws and policies, as if destiny could be steered by visions in the dark. The night after the funeral dream, sleep returned reluctantly. Yet when it did, it brought visions not of death but of command. The emperor awoke with images of scrolls and proclamations floating in his mind, words he swore he had never read before. Ministers were summoned, and soon the court heard what would be remembered as one of the most curious episodes in imperial history. Dreams that changed policies. In these visions, the emperor described standing in a vast hall where the walls were made of paper, each sheet covered in glowing script. When he touched a character, it shimmered and drifted down like falling petals. Some he recognized as decrees. Others were mysterious laws not yet written. He claimed to hear voices urging him to act, whispering that famine could be eased, or war prevented, if only he would sign what he saw in his sleep. For the court, this was both thrilling and dangerous. If dreams could dictate policy, then where did governance end and superstition begin? Yet who among them would dare tell the Son of Heaven to ignore what might be heaven's own counsel? Soon, edicts were drafted in the spirit of those nocturnal visions. Taxes were lightened in certain provinces. Grain was distributed with urgency. On another occasion, troops were ordered to withdraw from a costly campaign. Each act was justified by what the emperor had seen at night. There is something deeply human in this. Dreams often reflect hidden fears or wishes, and perhaps the emperor's visions were his subconscious pushing toward decisions he hesitated to make by day. But to his ministers, these were not private thoughts, they were sacred mandates. The words of sleep carried the same authority as words spoken in the throne room. Think for a moment about the effect on the empire. A farmer in the countryside might suddenly find his burden eased, never knowing that the reason was not a debate among ministers, but a dream scribbled in the palace diary. Soldiers recalled from the frontier might not realize that their fate was sealed by images seen in the dark. The unseen world of sleep reached into the lives of thousands. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some scholars muttered in disapproval, warning that such reliance on visions would weaken rational governance. They wrote carefully, fearful of censure, but their dissent trickled into the records. Others seized the chance, using the emperor's dreams as leverage for their own agendas. If a dream hinted at floods, they pushed for waterworks. If it suggested unrest, they called for harsher laws. The dreams became currency, traded by ambitious courtiers seeking advantage. And the emperor himself, he seemed caught between belief and doubt. On some mornings, he spoke with conviction, as if heaven had guided his hand. On others, he looked uneasy, as though aware that his ministers might be twisting his visions to serve themselves. Yet once a decree was issued in the name of heaven, it could not easily be withdrawn. The dream became law, and the law reshaped the realm. It's fascinating, isn't it? The image of a mighty empire bending under the weight of things seen only in the private silence of night. What does that say about power, that even the greatest rulers may lean on something as fragile, as fleeting, as a dream? One chronicle tells us of a night when the emperor dreamed of fire sweeping through a library. He awoke in a panic, convinced that wisdom itself was in peril. Within days, he ordered new archives built of stone, less vulnerable to flames. To later historians, this was a blessing, for those stone chambers preserved texts that might otherwise have vanished. Was it foresight born of fear, or simply heaven's hand guiding the emperor through images of smoke? Dreams that changed policies reveal the blurred line between governance and belief, between waking law and sleeping vision. But the records hold another layer. Not only did emperors dream, so too did the men who served them. And in hidden journals, scholars confess to recording their sovereign's dreams with care, weaving a secret tapestry of nightly visions. Not all dreams were meant for the emperor's ears alone. Hidden in dusty archives and private collections are journals written not by rulers but by the scholars who served them. These records, less grand than imperial edicts yet filled with quiet detail, reveal how officials tracked their sovereign's nightly visions with almost obsessive care. Imagine a scholar in the still hours before dawn, summoned to hear the emperor recount a dream. He bends low, brush in hand, capturing each word on paper that will never be read aloud in court. These journals were private, not always part of the official annals. They were a parallel record, a secret chronicle of sleep that only the most trusted eyes would ever see. Why keep such accounts? For one, they allowed ministers to detect patterns. If an emperor dreamed of floods 3 times in a season, perhaps heaven was indeed warning of disaster. If beasts appeared again and again, perhaps unrest was closer than anyone dared admit. Some officials compared notes across years, layering meaning upon meaning until dreams formed a shadow history of their reign. But there was another, more human reason: fear. Scholars knew that failing to record the emperor's visions might one day be used against them. Did you not hear when His Majesty dreamed of thunder? Why did you not note it? A missing entry could be construed as negligence, even disloyalty. Better to write too much than too little, even if the dream was nothing more than a muddled memory of banquet wine. Within these hidden pages, a different picture of the emperors emerges. One dream shows an emperor anxious about his ancestors, haunted by visions of a stern forebear who scolded him for neglecting ritual. Another reveals a ruler secretly longing for peace, seeing himself walking alone through fields with no soldiers at his side. These were not proclamations of power but glimpses of vulnerability, caught in the net of sleep. You can almost hear the whisper of the brush across the page, the scholar pausing, wondering how much to record, how much to soften. Should he write that the emperor trembled when describing a nightmare? Or should he cloak it in noble language, making weakness sound like wisdom? These choices mattered, for posterity might judge the emperor through these words. Centuries later, historians pore over these private records with awe. They show not just the grand stage of politics, but the backstage of fear, hope, and uncertainty. They remind us that emperors were not marble statues but men who dreamed, sweated, and fretted in the night. Some journals hint that scholars themselves began to dream in response. Surrounded by visions each day, they carried images into their own sleep. One wrote of dreaming the emperor's dream a second time, as if heaven had allowed him to share the burden. Another confessed he feared dreaming of the throne at all, for it felt like trespassing into sacred ground. The secrecy of these journals was paramount. They were often locked away, passed only to a successor trusted to continue the work. To reveal too much was dangerous. Yet thanks to their survival, we see more than the official story. We see the silent partnership between ruler and recorder, a relationship where every night held the possibility of revelation. And in the last of these secret notes, preserved in faded ink, lies a chilling account, a vision said to have come just before a dynasty fell. A dream not of tigers or dragons, but of darkness rolling over the land, so complete that even the scholars dared not write all they had heard. The palace was hushed on that final night, the silence thick as frost. The emperor, worn by years of rule and restless sleep, drifted once more into the uncertain realm of dreams. What he saw was so disturbing that when morning came, even the scribes hesitated to set brush to paper. It would later be remembered as the last dream of a dynasty. He described standing upon the ramparts of the Forbidden City, gazing out across a sky that should have been filled with dawn. Instead, darkness rolled in like a tide, swallowing rooftops, temples, even the sun itself. No torches burned, no stars pierced the black. The silence was total, broken only by the faint sound of weeping from somewhere he could not find. As he turned, the great palace gates cracked and fell. Beyond them lay not armies, not rebels, but emptiness stretching to infinity. Ministers listened in dread. To them, the symbolism was unavoidable. A world without light, gates collapsing, an empire vanishing into shadow. Whispers ran through the court that this was no simple nightmare. Heaven itself had delivered a verdict. The dynasty, once radiant, was nearing its end. Events that followed only deepened the unease. Reports of famine arrived, villages struggling with drought and flood alike. Rebellions flared in provinces far from the capital. To those who had heard the emperor's dream, every calamity became proof of its truth. The darkness was already spreading, they said, and no ritual could banish it. The emperor grew more withdrawn, his eyes heavy, his voice quiet. Some claimed he avoided sleep, fearing the return of visions. Others insisted he sought it desperately, hoping for a dream of light to counter the darkness. None came. The diary entries grew sparse, then stopped altogether, and so the dynasty drifted, like a ship with sails torn, toward collapse. The final dream, inked in careful strokes, outlived the throne it warned of. Scholars copied it, historians puzzled over it, and centuries later, we still shiver at the thought of an emperor watching his empire dissolve in a silence deeper than death. It leaves us with a question whispered across ages. Were these dreams true messages from heaven, or were they reflections of mortal fear dressed in the language of myth? Perhaps both. For in the end, what we dream and what we fear are rarely far apart. And with that, the chronicles of imperial dreams close not with triumph, but with the haunting echo of darkness swallowing light. Yet before you drift into your own sleep, let's soften the pace, letting the noise of history fade until only calm remains. And now, with the final dream of emperors lingering in the air, it is time to let the story dissolve into quiet. You've traveled tonight through chambers heavy with incense, along corridors where whispers clung like cobwebs, and into the restless sleep of rulers who once carried the fate of millions on their shoulders. Their dreams were fierce, sometimes prophetic, sometimes frightening, but always strangely human. They remind us that even those who wore the dragon robe were never free from the mysteries of night. As you settle into your own rest, notice how different the world feels when we slow the pace. Imagine the rustle of silk curtains, the hush of distant bells, the flicker of candlelight softening into darkness. Breathe deeply, as if you were standing in a courtyard after rain, the stones still glistening, the air cool and fresh. With every breath, the heavy images of emperors and omens slip away, leaving only calm. The truth is, dreams are not so far from stories. They weave fragments of memory, fear, and hope into patterns that vanish with the sun. Tonight, you've listened to the dreams of emperors, but soon you'll drift into your own. Perhaps they will carry nothing more than gentle fragment slaughter, familiar faces, or quiet landscapes where you can wander without worry. Let the images soften now, like ink fading on ancient paper. The clamor of history recedes, the walls of the palace blur, and what remains is silence. A silence wide and welcoming, where your own rest awaits. So close your eyes, let the night carry you, and remember, even the mightiest emperors had to surrender to sleep. And now, it is your turn.